about brief overview of what is Korean literature and how to understand modern Korean literature, the phenomena of modernity that we see in Korean literature. So once we see how many of you have done literature class, third year? Sundar was here. Oh, so what about first year? Second year? Okay. So some of you might have seen the videos that we have played here in this classroom on third year. So we'll go to the basics and try to understand why literature is important, what are the basic theories related to literature, and then how can we understand modern Korean literature in terms of periodic division that we have, and then thematic division. So based on themes and periods, briefly we will go through that. So talking about literature, how do you define literature? So there are many scholars who have defined literature because it is a very vast theme that literature covers. So basically it covers human emotions, something that falls under humanities, not even social science. And we have seen that how literature deals with our emotional concept of human life. So, next. I think there are some error. Anyway, so it is a literature that concrete outlook of humanity receives its expressions. Some of the lines that is offered by scholars. It takes a great deal of history to produce a little literature. Now, talking about history and literature, what is the difference between a text which is literal text and which is not non-literal text? So, literary text and non-literary text, how do you distinguish between that? If you see a history book, for example, you have some historical event, let's say 1857, right? You have all read about that in history book. So the apathy, the problems, the success or the failure of human lives, that were shared during those, let's say, that revolution. That is not merely limited to data, right? That this many people were died, this many people were injured, this many people were hospitalized, this many people suffered. So all the data, something which is based on statistics and data, is not covered in the domain of literature, right? Because as I said, that it primarily focuses on human emotions and how human emotions reflect, reacts, perceives. These are all related to our sensory organs. So eyes, nose, lips, skin, so all are deeply embedded on that. So based on that, we have tried to define the domain or the scope of literature in general. Okay. So it always anticipates life, it does not copy it, but bounds it to the purposes. The 19th century, as we know, is largely an invention of Blazek, that is said by Oscar Wilde. Or literature adds to reality, it does not simply describe it, it enriches the necessary competencies that daily life requires and provides. And this respect, it irrigates the desert that our lives have already become. Now, these are very vast expressions that are articulated by very famous scholars. So they say it adds to reality. Now when we talk about reality, reality has been a very pertinent theme that you see in literature, right? What is reality? Suppose I am standing here, so your eyes see something, a picture, right? An image. And that image differs from this angle to this angle, right? So a person standing here, the reality is this, but the person who perceives it has, it forms its own image, right? Those who know me personally will have a different point of view, idea about me, an image of me. Somebody just see outer, somebody can go a little bit deeper, somebody more deeper, right? And that also depends upon what kind of background you have. Somebody, suppose now you have all the mixed background, no? To some extent culturally very similar background also, but suppose professionally it's quite diverse area. For example, one is doctor, so a doctor will see to me in a different perspective, so we'll have a different perspective. And reality, if you talk about, the very famous example that we can say is, let's say a tree. No? When you are young, so it is a like experiencing from your life and learning from that, and that's how we build up our whole human experiences. So what happens when you see a tree, for example, outside there is a far standing tree. From very far away, how do you see? You see that the tree's color is something black or hazy. When you start approaching towards the tree, then you see there is a change of color, change of size. The tree which was looking like this much, it's growing, but actually it's not growing. You are coming closer to that and trying to understand that, you know, that the color and every aspect of trees are becoming more evident, more clearer to you, right? You then start understanding, oh, there are leaves also. The color of leaves are not black, it is green, then it is light green, then purple also, then some faded color also. So variety starts emerging. These are all data that you start seeing, observing it. But sometimes, so what happens that our sensory organs, you know, fail to capture all that. Now you have in digital area, you have a high resolution camera, right? So 48 megapixel. So you can see what our naked eyes cannot see. Or you can zoom in and then see. But even that also you don't see. From one camera to another camera, you have a different focal and then different functions. And based on that, your camera sees something, right? So talking about that reality, it adds to that reality, because what we think as a reality is not the reality that you will come to know about after you read about that person, you get to see that thing, you know. So you add to that reality, and you get to see more and more of that information. Okay. So it reflects as well as reflects reality. So refraction and reflection. What we see as a reflection is not exactly reflection. It reflects also, right? So science में जिन्होंने पढ़ा होगा. So basically there are 3-4 basic expressions, the foundational theory that we can quickly go. So literature also conveys profundity of thought, richness of emotion, insight into the character. If you talk about thought, emotions, they are all talking about mind and heart, right? If you see in Korean, we have not gone to the Korean part, but I'll just, because it is talking about thought and emotions. The first literary piece in Hindi, in Sanskrit is that Valmiki Rishi, right? On Tamas river, when he was passing by, he saw that birds, chirping birds, and then there was a hunter who killed that bird, and then he, seeing that picture, because he was enjoying life in a very blissful way, but suddenly he saw that one of the crunch, that bird is shot by that hunter, and that's how, with that lots of pain, spontaneous thoughts, he created and composed the first ever poem. in Sanskrit. What was that? And then we see a similar instances example in Korean also. So not in pure Korean, it was written in Chinese, that is called Hangjoga. That is also about King Yuri. That is considered as the first verse written in for the Korean literature. So it was later on translated into Korean. So that was Phal Phal Nanan Kwek. So Kwek was the bird. Oriole. The bird is called orioles. So Phal Phal Nanan Kwek Korinan Amsu Saro Chanda Puna Vero Wara Nino Yemovan Nia Amke Tora Khalko. So it is like the background is that the King Yuri, he had two wives. So one wife went back to her house. He was, after coming from the hunting, he realized that she is not here, and then he was going to that Chinese province to take her back. And on the way he saw these two birds in a very compassionate way, and then suddenly he was reminded of his wife, and in that pain of separation he composed these 4-line poems. So you see, in Chinese theory, I mean, we are talking about theory anyway, so these are all the Western that we are going to talk about. So talking about the Chinese thing, you have a painting theory, for example, where you have resemblance with life. You know, life means the poetry and the painting. What happens that when we talk about art, so there are variety of forms of arts, right? Film is a part of one artistic production of human mind. You have an artist painting there, no? So art is like creativity combined with imagination, and that's where literature is also a part of it. So any text in terms of literature that has text with imagination and creativity, these two forms are very, very important to make a normal text from a normal text to a literary text, right? So similarly, in forms of any forms of art that we see, we have to have a creativity and then imagination, and with that the reader or the observer or the spectator needs to understand those nitty-gritty of all those techniques. So literary techniques are there. If you want to understand the poetry, for example, you have to know what is simile, what is metaphor, right? What is symbolism? No? So what are the other technicalities, technique points that the author or the poet or even the artist has employed? If an artist has used certain color, what does that mean, right? So it has some meaning to that. If you say that these birds are crying, of course in Korean you have ulda, no? But in English we say crying. So crying and singing are two different things, right? So how to understand those contexts? So coming back to the art, we'll see the one example of how art can be a reflection of our humans' inner world, outer world, no? So literature also, in general, if you talk about that, we can connect it with the reality. So next, we have lesson theory and other theories. Next, so imitative theory, expressive theory, and affective theory. Three basic theories that we can talk terms of Western part. So imitative theory. Art is an imitation of something, thing, person or event in our world. Recreation or representation in a form not natural to it. Imitative instinct innate in human. Coupled with rhythm, harmony, pattern, it forms art. So imitative nature, right? When there is a kid, how does he learns or she learns about other things? She observes, and through that she tries to imitate, right? So imitation is our inbuilt nature or as a human. So coupled with rhythm, harmony and pattern, we'll see how harmony plays an important role. If any poetry, for example, जैसे हिंदी में भी आप देखेंगे, इंग्लिश में भी देखेंगे, even in Korean also. So there has to be rhythm. Why? It creates some rhythm, and rhythm with not only in terms of the words, meters. These are the parameters. These are the criteria through which we can analyze any poetry, especially poetry. So harmony, for example, harmony is a very broad word. We'll see how harmony with nature also plays an important role in forming artistic value of Korea. So artist refines nature by not including the imperfect aspect of nature but perfect example. This is again one interpretation. See, literature covers wide range of, because our human emotions are so wide, so full of varieties, that it is a complex mix of emotions, right? Sometimes we become happy as well as sad also. No? So that is where the whole concept of Han, no? Those who are there in third year may be aware about that, we discussed. So about the Han, that Koreans often talk about, and in literature also it is often mentioned. So with that we try to understand the socio-political and religious aspect of Korean society. So through that one can understand. So by definition Han is very complex. So this is a complex feeling of human emotions, trying to overcome your historical conflicts, but with the ray of hope that someday you will be able to overcome that problem. So next, the another is expressive theory. As you know, very famous quotation by Wordsworth: poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And the poet's job is to treat of things not as they are, but as they seem to exist through the senses and the passions. Again, it is talking about perceptions, the image that you create, right? When I say, let's say cat, right? When I say cat, then the image of cat may differ from one person to another, right? So there will be a common image of cat having 4 legs, 1 tail, and saying or uttering word meow, right? But the color or with the nature of the cat, the height of the cat will be all different from one person to another person, depending upon what your personal experience have, right? So says poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Feelings has to be very powerful, because in common life, who wants to write? So unless you are really in a very charged emotional state, one may not be liking to write something which is so poetic, right? What happens in your hustle and bustle of life? You suddenly go to in the lap of nature, and suddenly you feel being very poetic, and you start singing a very favorite song. Then you start, if you are very much poetic in your nature, you like writing something, so you start take up pen and then you write some poetry, right? So something happens that with the change of environment. If you go to a movie hall, then you have a different mood, different environment. Then you go to some other places, then it is different. So we have our emotions, various shades of emotions, through which we try to express that through that. So a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. Now spontaneous overflow is called poetry because those emotions are translated into words. But in practically it is not always the case. If you are really very learned person, if you are skilled, well-read person, then you can write a very powerful poem as you think. The important point is that whatever you feel has to be translated, conveyed in the same intensity, same intention, right? So what happens if we are not equipped with all those techniques and art? If we have lack of imagination, lack of creativity, what will we do? We will think something that, oh, I am very happy today, so how should I write? You start writing something but does not reflect it. So not, as I said, not what as you see, because that is different. So with the creativity and imagination, you try to make it something special, so that when reader reads, then it churns out its own emotions, right? If it is about poverty, if it is about richness, it is about inequality, if it is about gender, right? All these issues, if you write it in a very simple way, so what we think as a simple may not be very simple, right? But if it is poetic, it may be simply articulated, but it will have much more multiplied effect on that. So, for example, इमोशन तो है आपका, जैसे मैंने कहा वाल्मीकि ने लिखा, तो a person having the caliber of that of Valmiki is very rare. He could see and write then and there. In Bollywood or in Urdu literature, you have such talented personalities who can, just by seeing something or maybe by just with a thought coming in their mind, they can just translate it in a very beautiful way, which we as a normal person having no background, such background, may not be able to do that. That is what that art, the art lies. So, next. So talking about how this art and then color, the significance of color and those lines are important. So if you see this expressionist, this painting, for example, Munch, so it's like the screen. Screen में देखिए, अगर if you just see the painting, hardly it will affect us. You see what is this? It's a simple painting you will find, but it was sold with millions of dollars, because it had that much of significance. What was that significance? That expression, what it says, that image describes. I was walking along a path with two friends. The sun was setting. You can see that sunset there. Suddenly the sky turned blood red. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There is a fence. And there was blood and tongues of fire above the blue black. And the city and my friends walked on. And I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite screams passing through nature. Up screaming nature. So, his Edvard Munch, his paintings, what was this? Because the idea that led to this form is quite practical. It addresses a vast issue of nature, its destructions, and then screaming itself. Why he screams? You see, the picture is like abstract. You know, the color combinations, that volcano. What has happened that he had seen during the place where he was born was a volcanic active place. So he must have seen a lot of volcanoes, eruptions, and during those lavas that he could see, that must have influenced his thing. And then he had also manic depressive system. Altogether, he had a very tough time personally, as well as the surrounding where he spent his childhood. So what happened? That he says he trembling with anxiety and an infinite scream passing through nature. So the screaming, that screaming was not from the outer side, it was from inside also, that he felt, and then based on that he portrayed that emotion through this modern painting. So if you don't know the whole background, then probably it will be just like a simple painting, right? But suddenly with that explanation, those who are expert will get to see the combination of the words, the linings, the setup of the whole picture, and that's how this poetry, the world of art, is all about. Okay, let's go ahead. So, Korean literature. Now, talking about literature. So, in literature we say munhak, right? Munhak. So, what has happened that when we talk about munhak, then we have a basic concept. It all comes through, Chinese. So, according to Cho, what happens that 6th century philosopher, he defines literature as an association of various sounds that man makes, those with meaning which can be written down. So it has to be written, that is defined. But of course, the first ever form of literature or any art is always oral. So we have an oral tradition, and that is where we find a lot of similarity with Korean literature and Indian literature, whereas we started with orality. So orality has been, even in nowadays also you say pansori, that is also oral character of those form. So literature which is written, which is reasonable, that is pertains to intellect, then consists of meaningful speech sounds and gives joy. Ultimately, so last is which ultimately gives you joy. What happens that, like any other art forms, what happens that when you go to a movie, for example, right? Joy is something which we all want to have, right? Which we say fun nowadays. So joy is not always about happiness, right? It can be also sadness. How is that possible? As it is all very categorically defined in India's very famous Rasa theory, where we have categorized all the emotions of human emotions. So when you are happy, when you are sad, when you are feeling tranquility, all those emotions are categorized under certain categories. So here also, which gives joy. So joy means not only happiness, as I said, when you go to a movie, for example, you know, you see a very sad picture, right? But after coming back out of the hall, you say, oh, I like that. It was so beautifully done, right? You enjoyed thoroughly. Where that sadness may be just part of it. You might have cried in between for some time. Then might have laughed also after that. Then after that something felt emotional also, personal connections also, right? So what happens that through that we try to define that gives joy also. Reasonable, pertinent to intellectual, of course, it has to be connected to our day-to-day life, concerning to our human life or nature. One of the most dominant theme that we see in literature is the relationship between not only human emotions. When we say human emotions because it is written in a language that we can understand, right? And others cannot. A tree cannot understand my language, though it has our own effect on the trees. That is a different section altogether. But when we talk about any other things, so basically we are talking about ourselves, our perception, our emotions, right? When I say, for example, that a tree is dry, is dying, so basically dying of a tree is not about that tree. That tree may not be dying, but it is my perception that because of this, I conclude that the tree is dying, they are going to die. If I see a flower, then suddenly I realize, oh, that flower is smiling on me. Although the flower is the same which I saw yesterday, but yesterday I thought it is crying. Why? So what is changing? The flower is changing or I am changing? It is my emotional state which leads it to think that way, right? So if I am sad, then what happens? I go outside and आपने देखा होगा इतने सारे गाने बने, हजारों गाने बने, जितने शेर व शायरियाँ बनी, जितने गज़लें हुई, है ना, सारे इसी पे आधारित हैं. So it is not that other person, but for me as a reader, that is where the power of literariness or power of imagination, power of creativity takes a center stage in doing that. So in general, 17th century Kim Man-jung is very important. That he says literature is created when one's mind is spoken, become words. So it talks about spoken, orality, then written, and these contains rhythm and tune, and they become Kha Si Mun Po. So Kha is poem, Shi, that is poem in Chinese, Mun writing, Mun Ha, Mun writing, and then Bu with rhythm prose. So that rhythm and tune here refers to the format of literature. Words that represent a person's mind take on certain format. Literature can be subdivided into categories that includes Kha Si Mun Po. So Kha Si Mun Po is a general traditional definition that we come to know. Of course, every country has a very similar definition of literature, even in India, in other countries, because it generally deals with human emotions, and that may be nomenclature may be changed, but then Pak Chi-won was another scholar. Language represents all the feelings possessed by all living things. It knows all because the world is one. Then in 20th century, Yi Guangsu, he translated the term Mahak as literature. Therefore, it is the first to use this term as So same word literature, है ना, literatura for example in Latin. So it was Mungak or something in Chinese. So he first translated literature, no, as Munhak. Though the basic definition of literature kept alive, its interpretations and applications kept changing in the Communist Society of Korea. So those writing authored by Korean, what happens when we talk about then Korean literature? Now you have come to Korean literature. So generally you know that Korea was heavily influenced by the Chinese. So there has been a constant struggle to assert its own identity, either through the literature, either through the alphabets that was invented by Sejong. No? So making its own identity has been all seen during the modern time. So when you talk about Korean literature, that books that are available in Korea, they always say Korean literature written in Korean by a Korean and maybe for the Koreans, right? But which is not true. With a lot of translation work that has come now, the boundaries have been demolished, now submerged, and now we see a real emerging global form of Korean literature that we see today. Okay. So, Korea's history. You see, there has been some trend that we see in sync with the historical developments. That something happened in history and that led to certain kind of literary changes also. As we see, we talk about human emotion. If there is a struggle that will affect your emotion, you will be very your emotions will be different than when you are independent. If you are annexed by a foreign country or neighboring country, then your whole thought process will be adversely affected because of your loosening of your own identity and all. So we see whether it's a Koryo period, Silla period, Unified Silla period, Chosun period and modern period that we see and define. We have seen that how with the adoption of Buddhism, the Buddhist thought process influenced the Korean literary. There is a whole separate genre that is called Buddhist literature, which is highly influenced by the Indian Buddhist thought process. But there are other Koreanized version of Buddhism also that you find in those things. But more or less, because it was about Buddhism, you see a very strong presence of Buddhist element at the philosophical level. So this Buddhist philosophy is all reflected in that. So similarly, you have Confucianism also, Shamanism also. So and in modern times Christianity also. So you'll find that over the period of this historical division, there is also striking similarity of emotions or emotional changes that has occurred over the period of time. ठीक है? आप लोगों में से बहुत लोगों ने पढ़ा होगा, टर्म टूल कोर्सेज पढ़े होंगे आप लोगों ने, उससे पता चल रहा होगा कि थोड़ा थोड़ा आइडिया आपका ऐसा। नेक्स्ट, so Korea's natural environment. Natural environment has been playing a very pivotal role in consolidating the human emotions or Korea's emotions, right? But over the period, we have seen that how mountain, for example, if you are talking about symbolism, so mountain has played a very important role in terms of literary works that we see. So what has happened that we have seen that 70% of the land is filled with mountain. So a Korean is born in the lap of mountain and they are buried on the mountain. So mountain plays a very important role, and so the role of mountain we have seen, we see in the classes also, that what is a general image of mountain for us. If you are living in Delhi, for example, throughout our life, never seen a mountain, will probably not be able to understand that. But those who have been from the mountain area, they would very passionately, they will recall, oh, they used to go and have this jhula and then try to pluck all those fruits or something. The whole human emotions living together with the harmony, with the nature, something is all there, right? Here also we have seen that how symbolism of mountain has played and changed also. Changed as a source of inspiration for the, during colonial period also we have seen that how mountain played a role. For example, some of the poets that we see during colonial period, for example. So let's say they have composed 110 poems. So out of 110 poems, you see, if you analyze the words that they have used, it is mostly on nature, and nature means on mountain, right? So some of the poets during colonial period, they traveled to Japan, they got the education and came back, and then wrote back about the nationalistic thoughts. Some of them could not come back, but even they came back, they could not criticize the Japanese authorities. So those atrocities were never came to the main part in the literary piece. So for that also they were criticized. So there are many aspects during this period that we can take up for understanding Korean literature. So preserve their identity, ethnicity, homogeneity and freedom. So these are the words which are very much articulated in those modern works. So various visual and sensory images in modern times we see. For example, sea as an images of mountain, rural area, cities, innocence of child. Then talking about Korean aesthetics and Asian aesthetics. When I talked about oral, then orality is something that across the Asian countries we have seen. That, for example, the epic Ramayana, for example, has been adopted in other countries also, whether it is Sri Lanka, Burma and Indonesia. You see this adopted versions are already there, and through these oral expressions where you can have a whole stage performance by the various players on the stage for many days, so many days, because it is epic, and that is being practiced even in present day also in those countries. So orality has been very common. It has been a common thread that runs throughout these Asian cultures in general. So sea because Korea is surrounded by sea, but it is mountain that has played an important role, and after that we see sea also. Then innocence of child and spiritual life. In the between I was just mentioning the broad theme that I was talking about the internalization of emotions. When we talk about nature, then it is not the nature but us. So basically when we divide the themes, then it is on broadly 3-4 themes that we see in literature. That is man and nature, a relationship between man and nature. So nature is so vast, so everything that comes is that relationship with me, with the tree, with me, with the mountain, right? So that relationship is very, very important. Another is man versus man, we are living in a certain territory, geographical boundaries, you know? So our relationship with other other people from other boundaries. What are those boundaries? That is again a question. That boundary is limited to your own house, your own province, your own state, your own country, or it is the whole earth, right? So, man versus nature, man and man versus man. Then similarly, you have other permutations and combinations. So basically, these two are the main focus area that we see. Now, innocence of child and spiritual self, these are all, as I said, that Buddhism ran throughout the traditional era, even to the modern. But in modern, we have seen more of a Christian imagery or sensibilities as a modern phenomena in Korean society. Although we have a shrinking population of Buddhists in Korea, but nevertheless, they also form part of Korean belief system. So, innocence of child, what happened? That in modern times, especially 1990, when there was Samilundo, right? March 1st movement. So, it was not a very successful movement. There were some problems, it could not be materialized, and that led to a massive disappointment among the Korean people. And through that, there were a lot of introspections by the people, by the Korean literary figures also. They were not very clear about how to address those problems of Korean society, how to counter that force that is more powerful than your own country, that is Japan. So, in order to do that, there were nihilistic thoughts also, romantic thoughts also that started percolating in the society. So, what happened that some of the literary figures, they accepted the reality as it is, but some of them, they thought no, it is, anyway we are not going to counter and win that. So what is the other way out? So there were many techniques that they adopted. One was that they tried to look back to their tradition. So how did they do it? They started using those childhood memories, childhood wonders, then also going back to your hometown and feeling a sense of nostalgia, So because present time was so gloomy, so dark, so frustrating that he didn't want to face that. So he wanted to see how much good times you spent during your childhood or maybe in your hometown. So those kinds of poems also are found. So one of the technique was that when you talk about your hometown, then you don't talk about, for example, in pure Korean, standardized Korean. So you talk about Sathuri, you talk about the dialects that the Koreans used. So through that also they try to minimize the darkness or the negativity that pervaded in the Korean society. Okay, and next. So this Buddhist iconography, we have already talked about that. That Buddhist iconography during from the ancient, it came even in the modern time also. So through that Buddhist iconography, we had a feeling of tranquility that Buddha or Buddhism tried to spread. So meditative imagery are very, very famous that we can see in literary works also. Then harmony with nature, we know that it is all about the nature, so harmony of nature. during colonial period also, or when the Christian it was invaded, that many Buddhist monks, they went up towards the hillside, dark, deep in the mountains, and they made a lot of monasteries there. They started meditating that side. So still you will find it in Korea now also. Okay. Then next. Uh, next. Okay, now this is the start of our reform, 1894-95. That I just explained it. I think we'll stop it here because this is just starting of the modern. So next time maybe we will do that. Okay. So thank you.